Hello everybody, this is another Hot Wheels collector video. Today we are looking at the McLaren Solus GT. This is a brand new casting for 2023 and it first debuts in the 2023 Cube case in this white colour. I will also mention that this car is number 10 out of 10 in the 2023 Hot Wheels Exotic set, and I will also mention that this is car number 250 out of 250 for 2023. What a way to end off the year with a brand new casting. Definitely an awesome thing to see. But anyways, I will mention where I actually found this car then. So I found this car in a local Aldi store at the price of £1.69. That's sort of the standard price here in the UK for Hot Wheels mainlines, and some other stores which do sell them at that price include Smith's Toy Superstores, which is kind of like a Toys R Us type store, and also B&M, which is a bargains store. But yeah, I was super happy to hear in some Facebook groups that Aldi stores were going to be getting some Q case in. The reason I was so happy is because they classify Hot Wheels as a special buy. Essentially what that means, once they're gone, they're gone. They don't get them in for a very long time. I think the last time they got Hot Wheels in was nearly a year ago, to be honest. It was a really long time ago. So I quickly went to my local Aldi store on a Saturday, and I was super disappointed to see there were no new Hot Wheels in fact no Hot Wheels at all. So then I was looking through some comments on that same Facebook group, and people were saying there is a memo supposed to be going out which tells the stores to put them out on Monday morning. However, some of the stores didn't get that message and hence put them out early. So I went on that Monday morning which they were talking about, and yes, there were 5 whole brand new boxes of Hot Wheels there. I went through all of them. I got every single thing I wanted out of it, including all the new castings and all the new recolors I was interested in. Also 2 treasure hunts. However, unfortunately there was no super treasure hunt this time. That is something that I do come to expect though, and I've never found one in the wild. They're very difficult to find here in the UK. But I was super happy with all of my finds nonetheless. So let me give you some facts about the real life car. So in real life, this car has a 5.2 litre naturally aspirated V10 engine, and there are only supposed to be 25 units of this car to be created. However, this car is strictly for track use only and is not road legal. This car also weighs only 1,000 kilograms. That converts to 2,205 pounds. This car also produces 829 horsepower and 650 Newton meters of torque, converted to 478 pound-feet of torque. This car also has a 7-speed sequential gearbox and also has a top speed in excess of 200 miles per hour. That converts to 322 kilometers per hour plus. This car also has a 0 to 60 time in just 2.5 seconds. That's pretty impressive, especially since this car is a rear-wheel drive car. It wouldn't surprise me if this car was all-wheel drive and it was capable of that time, but since it's rear-wheel drive, that's even more impressive. All-wheel drive cars do just have more traction, so it's great to see that this rear-wheel drive car has so much traction and is capable of such a great 0 to 60 time. And the final fact I have here for you is this car costs £2.5 million, and that converts to about $4 million US. But anyways, that is it for the facts about this thing. Now let's move on to my showcase of the Hot Wheels model. Alright, so kicking off this showcase then, we'll first of all take a look at the side of this car, and I'll first of all mention the wheel choice on this thing. So this car is running on the 10-spoke wheels which first debuted in 2003, and on this car they have been painted in chrome. Very nice wheel choice there from the Hot Wheels team. I think these wheels look fantastic on this car. I don't think there would have been any better wheel choice for this car. Next up, onto the actual colour of this car then. It is all painted in this glossy white colour. It is not metallic at all and hence does not have any metal flake in the paint. Next up, onto the actual tamper work on the side of this car then. There's not an awful lot of it, but there is a little bit, and that is in the form of the side of this spoiler being tampered in black, and we also do have the racing number 91 also being tampered onto the spoiler of this car, being done in a dark grey colour. That is not a silver colour, it is just dark grey. Next up, onto the actual metal casting of this car then. There's quite a decent amount of detail here as well, so let's get straight into it. First of all, I'll mention that the side skirt of this car is created through the black base plastic. I will also mention that the side vent of this car is created through the black interior plastic and also a little bit of the black base plastic as well. So a little bit of a combination there. Both, you will be able to see the seam which separates the two different plastics. I will have an arrow pointing to that added during editing. Next up, I'll mention that all the windows on this car are wound up, and I will also mention that this casting does not have any wing mirrors, but that's totally fine as the real life car also does not have any wing mirrors. Next up, I do want to mention this vent which does feature on the rear fender of this car. It is moulded into the actual metal casting itself. However, it is not a hole or shut off and doesn't lead anywhere, it is just an indentation. We also do have some rear canards featuring in the metal casting of this car as well. Once again, they are just indentations, they don't stick out of the metal casting like you would probably hope they would, but they are there nonetheless, and that's an awesome detail to see featuring on this car. Very impressed with that. Next up, I'll mention that we do actually have a second vent featuring in the side vent of this car. Very interesting design there, but that is accurate to the real life car, and this vent does feature moulded into the actual interior plastic, creating the majority of the side vent of this car. It is not a hole in that plastic, it's just an indentation, much like the vent which we've just seen on the rear fender of this car. And the final bit of detail which I do want to go over is this little fin which does feature on the front splitter of this car. And that front splitter, as well as the fin, which features on the front splitter, is created through the black base plastic. And that front splitter of this car does receive some texturing. It is not just glossy black plastic like we usually see on most Hot Wheels models. I'll also mention that the side skirt of this car also does receive the same texturing that the front splitter of this car does receive. And finally, I do want to mention this small indentation featuring on the front fender of this car. It is in the metal casting, it's not a hole or shut off, it's just an indentation. Now what is this actually representing? All it is a carbon fibre piece which features on the real life car. Anyways, that is it for the side of this thing. Now let's move on to the front of this car. Alright, so taking a look at the front of this car then, we do have quite a lot of detail here in the form of tamper work, metal casting and also plastic usage. So first of all, I'll mention the tamper work which does feature on the hood of this car, and that is mainly in the form of a racing stripe. This stripe does actually start off quite thick and then it quickly narrows through a triangular shape into a thinner stripe, and this stripe does run all the way to the roof scoop of this car, which I will talk about in just a little bit once we do get onto the top of this car. I will mention that this stripe has been done in this quite light blue, but it's got this kind of washed out appearance to it. Very interesting blue, it's quite hard to describe. Next up, I'll mention that the McLaren badge, which does feature on the real life car, is tampoed on here accurately using silver tampo. Next up, I'll mention that the entirety of the front splitter of this car, as I've already mentioned, is created through the black base plastic, and I've already mentioned that this splitter does have two little fins, one to the left and one to the right, and I've also mentioned that this front splitter does have this interesting texture to it, and is not just glossy black plastic. And finally, I'll mention that the front grille of this car is actually a shut-off or hole in the metal casting. That's really awesome to see. Now on the real life car, this front grille does not have any cooling systems inside of it. Instead, the sole purpose for this front grille on the real life car is for aerodynamics, and to maximise rear downforce on this car. Whilst we're here, I do want to mention that unfortunately the headlights of this car do not receive any detail in terms of tamper work, but that's not a problem because you can easily add your own detail to this car using something like acrylic paint or Sharpies. Oh, and one other thing I do want to mention whilst we're here is you will notice that this car does actually have windshield wipers. They are actually pointing up on this car and do feature in the plastic which is made to represent the glass of the real life car. Awesome detailing there. It is a small detail, but it does mean quite a lot to me. It just makes this car look a lot more realistic in my opinion. But anyways, that is it for the front of this car. Now let's move on to the next side of this thing. Alright, so taking a look at the next side of this car then, it is the exact same as the previous side, so I'm not going to bore you with going over everything all over again, but you can pause the video here and have a look for yourself if you are looking for something specific. If not, let's move straight on to the rear of this car. Alright, so taking a look at the rear of this car then, we do have quite a lot of detail here as well, so let's get straight into it. First of all, I'll mention that you can see that large spoiler which does feature in the metal casting of this car. It is not a separate plastic piece. It's done very nicely and is pretty accurate to the real life car. You'll be able to see a little bit more detail from that spoiler once we do move on to the top of this car in just a second. Next up, we do have this piece of aerodynamics which does run all the way from the roof scoop of this car all the way to the spoiler of the car, featuring in the metal casting as well. It's sort of this ridge which does protrude from the rest of the body of the car. Done very nicely there, and it is painted in the same colour as the rest of the body of the car. It doesn't receive any tamper work, but it doesn't need any to be accurate to the real life car which this car is based off of. Anyways, that is it for the metal casting of this thing, so now let's move on to the plastic usage. So first of all, I'll mention that the entirety of the diffuser of this car is created through the black base plastic, and that is literally the only plastic usage on the rear of this thing. It's all just the black base plastic, and that includes the exhausts which are dual exit and do feature on this car, very nicely modelled on there by the way, and also the track light which also features modelled onto this car. Now if you don't know what the track light is or what I'm talking about when I say track light, it's essentially this little light which features on the rear of all track cars, and it warns drivers which are behind the car that there is a car in front of them, and it is particularly useful in conditions such as fog and other weather where visibility is poor. And finally, I'll mention that these two pieces of carbon fibre, which do feature on the real life car, are modelled once again into this car using the black base plastic. Very nice use of that indeed. It all looks very realistic and accurate to the real life car, which is great to see. Unfortunately, there is no tamper work featuring on the rear of this car, so things like the rear lights of this thing don't receive any detail, but you could easily add your own detail using something like Sharpie or acrylic paint. Adding detail isn't too much of an issue here. You could easily do it yourself if you really wanted to. Anyways, that is it for the rear of this thing. Now let's move on to the top of this car. Alright, so taking a look at the top of this car then, the detail does not stop yet. First of all, I will mention that you can see the spoiler of this car, which does feature in the metal casting, as I've already mentioned, from a top-down view, and you will also notice that there is some extra detail which you can only see from the top view. That is in the form of some lines which are engraved into the metal casting and are indentations. Now what those actually represent is a hole in the actual real-life car's spoiler, which you can see on the card art here. So that's awesome to see that detail featuring here. That hole does feature on the real life car, once again to increase aerodynamics and downforce. Unfortunately though, on the Hot Wheels model, it is not a hole or shut off, it is just an indentation. Alright, so next up I'll mention the 4 vents which do feature here in the metal casting. 2 of these vents are actual shut offs or holes in the metal casting and do lead to the black interior plastic, which does receive some texturing and is not just glossy plastic. However, the other 2 vents unfortunately are just indentations in the metal casting, and unfortunately do not receive any tamper work to make them look more realistic. It definitely would have been nice to have seen these vents receiving some black tampo to increase their realistic look. Since they have already given this car a top tampo print press, it just seems like a cost cutting measure there, and that's unfortunate. The reason why these vents don't lead anywhere is simply because these vents feature above the wheel wells of this car, and there simply isn't enough room to squeeze the interior plastic into the wheel wells, as well as the metal casting itself. Next up, I'll mention that the roof scoop of this car is portrayed accurately through the metal casting, very nice detailing there. And you will also notice that there are 2 circles featuring on the roof scoop of this car as well. Now what those are representing is aerials which would feature on the real life car for track communications. Next up, I'll mention that the racing stripe, which starts off at the hood of this car, does continue onto the roof of this thing and goes pretty much all the way to the roof scoop of this car. Next up, I'll mention that there are 2 more vents featuring on this car, one on each front fender. Now these vents do not lead anywhere and are not shut offs or holes in the metal casting, instead they are just indentations, unfortunately. I wish that these did receive tamper work, as I've already mentioned, since this car did receive a top tampo print press, but unfortunately they didn't. So we'll just have to accept what we've been given here. But that would have been a nice detail indeed, so that is unfortunate. Finally, I do want to give you a front view of the roof scoop of this car, so you will be able to see that this does not have a shut off or hole inside of it. Instead, it is just an indentation, so it does have a limited realistic look, unfortunately, but it does a good enough job at looking like a roof scoop. I would also like to mention that from the top view, you can see there are actually 2 pieces of plastic creating the front grille of this car. The second piece of plastic, which I haven't already mentioned, is the interior plastic. These 2 pieces of plastic work together fantastically to make the front grille of this car look a lot more realistic. Awesome job from the Hot Wheels team there. And the final piece of detail which we do see is another vent featuring on the hood of this car. This is actually a hole or shut off in the metal casting and looks very realistic. And this vent does lead to the black interior plastic, which is creating a suspension component which does feature on the real life car. You can see this suspension component on the card art here. Awesome levels of detail there. Unfortunately though, this suspension component does not receive any tamper work to be accurate to the card art. To be accurate to the card art, it would have needed to be tampered in red. But anyways, that is it for the top of this car. And that is also it for my showcase of this thing. So now let's move on to my final thoughts and review on this car. Alright, so now it is time for my final thoughts and review on this car. I really do like this casting, I love the metal usage on this thing, and also equally the plastic usage. All of it combined just makes this car look super realistic, and it definitely does look like a modern casting, which I'm very pleased to see. I also really love the fact that this car does have windshield wipers, and I like the wheel choice on this thing as well. I think the 10 spokes done in chrome look fantastic on this thing. I do hope that this car does come to premium at some point, where it will receive the proper tampo treatment, including the front headlights of this car, and the entirety of the rear of the car. But this mainline is not bad at all, I'm not saying that, I just hope that it does come to premium, where we will see a little bit more detail. The only gripe I do have in terms of tamper work is on the top of this car. I do wish that they had tampered the vents on the top of this thing. Now what I mean by that is the vents which feature in the metal casting As an indentation, it would have been nice to have seen them tampered in black. It would exaggerate them a little bit more, and I think it would have made them look a lot more realistic. Really, there's no excuse that they didn't do them. I think it must just be cost cutting. They do still look pretty decent, but I do wish they did receive tamper work. It would just make this car look a lot more realistic in my opinion. But yeah, this thing is just awesome. I love this thing. It's a really solid casting. It's definitely not a bad one, but I really do think that this car does deserve to come to the premium lineup. Maybe it would look good in something like Boulevard, but also I'm thinking more of like a race day set, like what we saw this year. I think it would have suited that set fantastically, and honestly, I think they should have probably debuted the casting there. This is a really nice mainline, don't get me wrong, but I think it would have looked a little bit better with the tampo treatment which you do get on premium cars. But let me know what your thoughts are on this casting down below. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Let me know why as well. But anyways, that does lead me on my score out of 10 for this thing. So one of this car out of 10, it is going to be receiving a well-deserved and respectable 9 out of 10. The simple reason why I'm not going to be giving this car a 10 out of 10 is because of the lack of top tampo, like I've already mentioned. I really do wish that those vents did receive some black tampo to make them look more accurate to the real life car. Really, the only reason why they haven't done them must be cost cutting, and that's really unfortunate. But yeah, I can't wait to see where this car pops up in the future. Nonetheless, it's going to be a great release, I'm sure. And it is already coming to next year's mainline, I believe in the B case or C case, one of those two cases, I can't quite remember. But yeah, it's in blue and it looks really fantastic. In fact, it might even be better than this release. But keep your eyes open for that thing in stores, it will be coming soon. But anyways, that is it for this video. So if you guys did enjoy, make sure to like. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. Remember, you can also press that notification bell so you do not miss any new uploads. Remember, you can also share this video with any friends, family, or any groups who may be interested. But remember, don't feel pressured to if you don't feel like you have anybody who may be interested. You watching this video all the way to the end means so much to me, and I really do thank you for making it all the way up until this point. But anyways, that is it for this video, so I hope you guys did enjoy. I really do hope to see you guys in the next one. Bye bye everyone.